everybody that you talk to will agree that there were Highland clearances. And when I first began to think that I should put down what I had found out about the Highland clearances in a book, I thought, well, I know what I'll do. I'll find out the present addresses, present names and addresses of all what they still call themselves clan chiefs up in the Highlands, and an amazing number are still there. You would think that the normal mishaps and changes of society would have swept a lot of them away. Many of them are still there, who are the great-great-grandchildren of the people who cleared out their clan lands in the Highlands. But I found out that by going to looking in libraries, looking on the computer, though there wasn't a computer in those days, you could find out a great deal about where people live now. In fact, only the other day, the very oldest clan chief that I can remember, he lived, I think, to be over 100. He actually shared my Christian name for some peculiar reason, Alwyn. He was Alwyn Farquharson of Invercourt, who was the head of the clan Farquharson. And when I got in touch with him, I'm now talking about 30 or 40 years ago, he lived in the Highlands, but curiously enough, when he died, it was at Brancaster, not quite such a mountainous place. Brancaster Staithe is where he lived. But I found out all these people, I don't know, 50 of them, more. And I wrote to them all. And I hoped that one or two of them might write back and give me actual help as to, because you might well say, oh, well, you can't blame what his great-great-grandfather did. And I thought some of them might say, well, yes, I can't defend it, and this is what happened. But all the ones I wrote to, and I got all the replies, still in one big folder upstairs, all the replies. Everybody agreed that there were clearances. The only thing they didn't agree was there weren't any clearances here. No clearances here. So we've got, if you put all these answers together, you've got, I don't know, 50 clan chiefs. And adding them all together, there weren't any clearances. But on the other hand, there were clearances. So how do you put those things and get them together? I can't think. But one or two, I have to. MacDonald of Glengarry, let me say, he says he lives down in Suffolk. He's long given up any connection with Glengarry. But his reply was, yes, my ancestors declared I can't defend it. And it's a very sad episode, and so forth. But he was a very exceptional reply. Almost everybody else would say, clearances? I've asked everybody around about here, and obviously he'd asked his cousin and his uncle, and there wasn't clearances, no clearances. So I've got all these assurances that there were no clearances. But some people who must have employed very good public relations experts are still there with no clearances here. One or two, you have to say, there were clearances. But I'm thinking, let me see, Mackay. If you go up to Sutherland, the most northwesterly parish in the Highlands, and of course you say Sutherland, what's south about it? It's not souther, it's norther. Why is it called Northernland? And in fact, it got its name from the Vikings who lived up in the Orkneys and the Shetlands, and to them, the coast of Scotland was the Sutherland. So that's what they called it. And so you've still got this big county, Sutherland. Most of the county was inhabited by the Sutherland clan. And again, everybody thinks, oh, everybody had the same surname. Not so at all. The Sutherland clan, the surnames were, let me think, Sutherland, obviously, Murray, Gunn, Matheson, Gordon, half a dozen clan surnames. But there was one part, a third of Sutherland, which was not in the Sutherland clan. It was a separate clan of Mackays, and it was called the Ray country, R-E-A-Y. And the chief of the Ray Mackays was called Lord Ray. And Lord Ray, who took over the chiefship and the landlordship of the Ray Mackays in about 1780, he decided that he had a much better idea than letting the Ray Mackays stay where their ancestors had been for centuries. He would throw them out and he would let the land to big farmers. So that's what he did. He was really a fairly, you can't really defend him. He spent his time down in London. As many authors say, in and out of the pubs and the brothels. That's where Lord Ray, spent his time. And yet he must have had some very good public relations people working for him, because I can still find books now which say, oh, Lord Ray was a marvellous chap, no clearance. And how you can ignore the evidence is really astounding. In fact, sometimes I'm feeling, can I believe this? People say, how do you become a historian? I feel like saying, well, firstly, it's an ability to ignore all the evidence and write down what everybody else has written. And I can still find your books up in my library. They say Lord Ray was a marvellous chap. In fact, he was a completely worthless individual. There was nothing going for him at all. And he threw all the Ray Mackays out, let the land, and we were talking about income afterwards. By going through all these abstruse documents of the 18th century, I was able to find out what his income was. And he was, in 1800, his income was about 15 times what his grandfather had had as an ordinary clan chief in 1750. Now 15 times as much. I mean, that's an enormous amount. I've met people when we came down from college, they all got jobs, and sometimes you go and see them and they have a broad smile on their face. Why, what are you grinning about? I've just got 2% more on my income. Oh, good, 2%. Well, what about, as I was saying before, what about 15 times as much? That would give you a grin on your face. And that's what he had. And he did no good at all. He was down in London, throwing it around, simply wasting it. And finally, what happened to him? In the late 1820s, he was so short of money that he had to go to the Countess of Sutherland, who was the clan chief of 2/3 of Sutherland, and borrow money from her. And people who were around at the time said, ah yes, it looks like she's being generous lending money to Lord Ray, but I bet I know what she's after. Lord Ray will waste it and he won't be able to pay it back, and she will simply foreclose on all his land. And guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. He borrowed, was it 100,000? Which was, I mean, 100,000 then, millions. And he wasted it as well, and he couldn't pay it back. So the only way he could get rid of the debt was by handing over the whole territory of the Ray Mackays to the Countess of Sutherland. This was about 1830. And he had a few bob left over after he'd given all the clan land. It wasn't his to give away, of course, but however, he gave it away, handed it over to Countess of Sutherland. He had a few bob left over, which he invested in a dubious West Indian venture which went bankrupt, so he died completely bankrupt. And that was the end of the Ray Mackay. But he still has his friends in the history schools, and they still write about what a fine chap he was. How you can ignore the evidence, I do not know. I wish I could have him here in front of this camera and try and persuade them. You know, what evidence have you got? What slightest scintilla of evidence have you got? And the answer is none whatever, except that's what this other chap wrote. That's all. That's how you write history books. But that is what many clan chiefs now say. As I say, I have all these replies I got, decades ago now, from the clan chiefs, virtually all of whom say, oh yes, they were clear, it was terrible, I'm not in favour of that at all. Fortunately, my ancestors were totally against clearance, and there were no clearances. How they then explain why the clan lands are empty, did they all decide? Did they? Suddenly you see reading history books and you begin to think, come on, how did they decide to emigrate? They've been there for centuries. They loved their own clanland. They had their own names for every mountain, every hill, every hillock. They had their own names for every river, every stream, every little trickle of water. They loved it. All that they ever wanted to do was to lie where the bodies would be next to their ancestors in their own clanland. And suddenly, I mean, do they expect us to think that one morning at breakfast they said, I know, let's all go live in New Zealand, shall we? And everyone said, good idea, and they all went off to, oh, come off it. You know, if you're going to persuade people with what you write, you have to be a bit more persuasive than that. Why did they all suddenly depart? And the only reason is, of course, the clearances, which you will hear, I hope, more if you watch all our videos. And if you press the little bell, you will help us to get more videos out. Thank you.